Hey, what's up? You're watching The Sit Down. I'm DJ Sixsmith. Gentefied on Netflix. It's a good one. Marvin, Lemus, Linda, Yvette, Chavez. Guys, what's going on? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
So this has been a long journey for you guys, and it has been 4 years of your life, and maybe even a little more than that. So what's it like to finally see your show out there?
It's been overwhelming.
I'm sure it has.
It's been a lot.
Yeah.
It's like everything we wanted for folks to feel and to walk away from the show, like all the questions that we've been trying to plant, like we've been on Twitter obsessing and like just looking at everything, and it's just like everybody's
the lines that they call out, the like little gifts that they're using, like, and even the things that they're connecting to, like just emotionally, or the fact that they're like, I made my mom sit down and watch it. I made my kids sit down and watch it. Like the multi-generational part of it has been so like fulfilling, because we really wanted that. We wanted people to feel their whole families in the show. So to have people then binge it, and so now I'm binging it with my abuela, and I'm binging it with my nieces and nephews. It's wild. So I love it.
Yeah, like there's like a tweet about like, what was it? Somebody saying like my dad. Like,
yeah.
My dad. I haven't seen him like laugh so hard that he started wheezing. Like I haven't seen that in so long, and I was like. It just makes us feel so good, because I'm like, like you said, like we wanted something that, you know, would honor, like our cousins would like, and like it's gonna be something that's like feels fun and fresh. And
there's that one guy who was like my can we cuss?
By all means,
my cholo ass is like over here crying because he's like he was like a guy who was like a gangster, and he's like, I'm over here like crying over Gentefied. It's that, like we wanted like guys who were tough to watch and started crying, and women and men, like everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely emotional, and I think there's something for everybody here. So over the course of the few years for you guys, what was it like unpacking some of these meaty issues? Because there's a lot to tell with this story. There's classism, there's some racism in there, there's LA as just the backdrop. What was most important for you guys?
I think, well, you know, what we boiled it down to is like, there's a lot of issues that we tackled, but we always boiled it down to community versus self. And I think, you know, because we are dealing with identity and we're dealing with a class, but what we boiled it down to being community versus self, community meaning your neighborhood or your family or your friends versus yourself. Because what we found when we were going into this story was the thing that we were struggling with, which is, you know, as we chase the American dream and we're following the path that our parents set out for us, the path that they sacrificed everything for, and that they like constantly reminded us about and guilt tripped us about every time we were late to class, you know, and as we do that, as we follow that, we kind of distance ourselves from our culture, and then it's so hard to navigate, you know, chasing that American dream, but then also moving away from those traditional family cultural values that we grew up with, and having to figure out, like, can you have it all? And I think that was one of the core kind of themes that we were really trying to explore.
And of course, like gentrification, like was the thing that the community of Boyle Heights, which is so passionate about protecting its identity as a community, was such like a metaphor for things that we were both experiencing around, you know, trying to preserve who we are as people living between these two borders with these immigrant parents, between our like their home country's culture and the culture here. So like looking at gentrification and how that impacts people that are most vulnerable, how that's kind of like a metaphor for our identity issues. Like we just wanted to like look at that and humanize it and show it through people's stories and characters experiencing the world in a very human way and seeing them struggle in that gray area. Nothing's black and what we discovered was like things aren't black or white. It's very much a gray area, and we tried to play in that space with the show where we showed all these different issues but never judged it. We never judged the characters. We let them just be, so that we can just open the conversation and so that everybody can relate to it, because none of us ultimately have the answers sometimes. And
Yeah, I think that's the best part. You guys created this runway. You allow each character to explore its own issues, because everybody's got something. And like the immigrant parent thing is really interesting, because you have the one son who's working with his father, and then the other son who's pursuing his dream, and the relationship in which the father looks at it is a little different. So what's most fascinating about the immigrant parent and the southern daughter for you guys?
What's most interesting about it, I mean, like I was saying, like for us, it's like, as we chase that American dream, we kind of start to remove ourselves from our culture. We start to distance ourselves, and like, you know, Gentefication especially is like, as we're creating these spaces for ourselves, as like Chris and Eric are trying to create something that honors their culture and that is a space that feels like home and where they belong, which is something that we didn't get to grow up with that. Like, it's something that's very recent that we're starting to experience. Is like, especially in LA, like Chicanos are creating these Mexican American spaces that feel so beautiful and so like full of pride. And then I remember, like Linda telling, when we first started working on the digital series 4 years ago, you told me that story about taking your mom to a restaurant.
This, like, Chicano, like, fish place, but it was like they did mojarra, which is a very Mexican type of dish, but it was a Chicano, like it was like a hybrid, like Mexican place. I thought it was dope. I was like, this is my type of spot. I'm a chipster, like Chicano hipster. I was like, I'm into it, and I brought my mom and my dad, and I was like, look, they have this and that. And somehow it came up where she was like, I was like, don't you feel great here? And she's like, and I was like, what's wrong? And she's like, I don't know, it's just everybody here is like Chicanillo, like they're like born here, and somehow the conversation came in where she was like, I've never felt fully comfortable around people who are born here because I feel like they judge me. And like that was so like, first that broke my heart because I was like, oh damn, like I never thought about that being an issue, but also secondly, like I never thought about our parents potentially not feeling fully embraced here in this country, even by their own children, who've had to learn how to assimilate in different ways and have also adopted a lot of cultural stuff from the U.S. that has often been used to shame them. And so then for them to then like feel some of that shame around us like broke my heart. And we talked a lot about that and that connection and that honoring and removing that shame from this older generation that we feature so much in the show. And we do that because they're so vital to our upbringing. And you talk about immigrant parents and grandparents. In the show, actually, Pop is their grandfather. Like that immigrant elder is like central to our lives. Like I don't think people understand that in U.S. in America, and we're part of the American trajectory, but they're so central to our lives, and we want to see them have joy. We want to see them like reach goals too, like because they sacrifice so much for us. And so that relationship you're talking about, it's very much child of immigrant. Like we're always hella guilty. We're like they did so much for us. Like oh my god, I gotta like buy them a house, or I gotta like I gotta bring them to New York. I brought my mama to New York with me. That's how like all the things.
The guilt is built in with
this is automatic.
With the American dream. Like somebody we were in an interview recently, and somebody brought up like like there's a lot of themes around love and equaling sacrifice, which and like just hearing the word sacrifice was so triggering because I was just like anytime we were late to class or just like if we just like we're just out of line or like I got a call from your teacher today, like mijo, that's not why we came here, like that, like being like just being into
You're
us.
like, oh
my god, like the disappointment. I'm just like that's not why we came here. Like, I gotta make it to class on time, like
I'm just trying to do my thing, Bob. Come on.
I was trying to get my Cheeto boat and like I just was late. It was lunch. I'm sorry. And so I think that it's just so ingrained in us, but it's just so real. And I think for us, I mean, it's such a huge part of our drive. It's become a part of our motivation for why we do what we do, because I like making this show was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. Like I mean, filmmaking is hard. It's long. It's grueling hours. It's and being artists, like we're being so vulnerable and so open. But like even with this being so difficult, like I just don't think I'll ever feel like I've done nearly as enough or sacrificed as much or worked as hard as my parents did for me to have this opportunity to be able to even have the delusion that I think I could do this, And so
we inject all of that into the series. I think it's really just a reflection of our own identity struggles and our own like wanting to see something we've never seen on television before. Television is a reflection of all of our experiences, but our experience hasn't really been fully reflected in the way that we have lived it. And like to just see that, to be able to relate to that, we just knew there were so many people out there who wanted to connect to it in that way. And the beauty of this past weekend has been like, holy crap, there have been like the response, and I was telling you earlier, like folks are reflecting back to us the exact things that we wanted it to do, and for them to feel seen and to feel like you're describing my relationship with my mom, like her working till 2 a.m. on garment work, and me trying to get her, helping her and trying to get her to understand that I gotta go work on my dream, like that's just hasn't been fully mined. And like he and I were like that's our jam, and that's what we want to show with our characters, Chris, Eric, and Hannah, and Pop, and their Beatriz, and all the characters, Javier, like they all have that dream, and to some degree, and how they navigate around each other is like for us what's fascinating and what we love.
Yeah, I mean, just our communities are our superheroes, man. I think I just wanted to show that.
No, it's really incredible, and to do it with front-facing characters and not just one character in the show. It's like, no, everybody in this show is going through the same plight, and like that makes such a huge deal. Like, because there haven't been these shows, so like when you guys were growing up, what were the things that you were watching that drove this artistic interest for you?
Oh my God, I know people always ask that question. It's like, what were the shows that you looked to that were like you? The shows that I started to find, I was actually older by the time they came out. Like I was like in my teens, maybe, but as a child, there weren't very many shows that I saw my experience reflected in, and a lot of times, I say this because not that my experience is at all the same as like the African American experience, but this idea of being othered in a lot of those series back in the day, like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and like Family Matters.
Totally,
There were a lot of topics that they would bring up in those series that were a lot more relatable to me than like a lot of the white shows, where I felt like, oh, I can relate to. Yeah, just the sense of being othered in some way, like that connection, and or Girlfriends, like there was just like a lot of shows like that I was really connected to, that for me felt like I can show our cultural way of being through art because I saw that reflection. It was so funny, my brother, the other day was talking, I recorded him saying, he was like, I was watching the show, sister, and like, I was like, oh man, this must be how white people feel, like when they see themselves. And so he's like, I never thought about it because I'll watch white shows and they're like hella cracking up, and I'm like, okay, like I get it, but is it that funny? He's like, and then he was like, and then I saw your show, and then I was like, damn, I was cracking up. I was like, that's my homie, that's my primo, that's my tia. He's like, I was like, this must be how white people feel. And I like for him to say that, like, it's just so. One, I didn't even think about that fully. I mean, we thought about it, but it's just like.
Well, I had heard like similarly, when Master of None came out, I have like an Indian American friend who like said the same exact things. Like, wow, is this how white people feel? So I was like, oh man, and like I love that show, and it was such a huge influence on us and on this show.
Yeah, it really was.
And because I mean, my favorite shows of the last few years have been. The ones that centered POC and immigrant, first gen, the characters, and
Atlanta.
And but so to hear your brother, like you told me that yesterday that your brother said that, and I was like, oh man, we did that, like that's amazing.
Yeah, and my mom also said, she was like, it's crazy. My mom was like, I watched the show and I was like, oh, whoever made this didn't have any shame. They didn't have shame about who they are and their culture. She's like, I've seen other things with Latinos in it, but I always feel there's like some sort of shame around certain things about us. Like we can't be poor or like really Mexican or really this, like we have to toe the line between like just acceptable enough to white audiences. She's like, and I don't know how to explain it.
It's like when your white friends come over.
And you just like sit straight.
We have to use the nice. We never use these plates.
Or we have to talk a different way.
Yeah,
or stuff like that, right?
It's code switch, talking a different way.
It's like my mom's like dinner make. I'm like, what? I was like, you just what to do dinner? Like you're making why are you doing that?
But exactly, that's what she was saying.
I was like, that's not how we are when we're home by ourselves.
This is the first time I watched something where I was like, whoever did this had no. Well, she was like, I know you did this, but
right, but just saying overall,
you had no shame. There's no shame in who we are. And like the way she said, she's like, somos mexicanos. She's like, this is how we talk. This is what we like our tacos, and this is how we're surviving, and this is what we're doing. She's like, I don't know. She just connects to that really hard, and to hear those things, to feel that was what came through is one of the reasons why we always talk about like why it's important to have POC creators behind camera about POC shows, because we're gonna write from a place of love and very deep knowing versus folks who may not know our communities are going to write from a place of us being the other and maybe a little bit of fear around who we are too. And so that's going to be a very different depiction of us and our people than if you put people like us behind the camera and writing on the page. So
yeah, it goes a long way for a number of different reasons. And just like the shame portion of it, by having you guys in the driver's seat here, like that doesn't come across, whereas maybe intentionally or unintentionally, it does come across in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, there's bias that people work through, like implicit bias, like they don't even know. And then also, I mean, the depictions that we've seen of ourselves in Hollywood and film and TV for so long have been just so two-dimensional, and it's just recycled the same kind of imagery. And so I think that we were working from a place of, I mean, like, let's write a comedy, let's make a dramedy that like is influenced by all of our favorite filmmakers and all of our favorite TV shows as American kids, that isn't meant to just be, either Hollywood either makes something that is just going to play for Latin America, and I was like, well, that's great, I love you know, Mexico. I love my, like, you know, my origin countries, but like I'm American.
Right.
Like I'm an American kid. Like I grew up here. I didn't leave this country till I was like 23 for the first time.
Yeah, I listened to SWV and I listened to Maná. Like,
right, you had both.
Yeah, that's what you hear in the show. A lot of people have been talking about the music, and they're just like, wow, like we love the music in this, and it's this range of like hip hop and R&B and rancheras and like. In all kinds
and
of
like
different
East LA bands like Chicano Batman,
yeah, like
Carla Morrison.
Yeah, it's a beautiful
like,
duality, and I think it's important to embrace that and lean into it. And the whole LA thing I think is really interesting because I think it's really easy to get stereotypical about Mexican Americans or Mexicans in general in Los Angeles, and you guys certainly debunk that. So what's it been like seeing the evolution of LA and also just the evolution of Mexican Americans in Los Angeles too?
I mean, the evolution of LA in which way?
Just in terms of how it's grown in the way it looks at Mexican Americans and people from Mexico as well. And also how Mexicans look at LA too, because I think there's kind of this combination of things happening here. So I just feel like from when, say if Pop was growing up in LA, right, compared to when the kids are in LA. What are the biggest differences?
Well, my family immigrated to East LA back in the day, like decades ago when my mom and dad were younger. And like, it's so funny because, I mean, for me, like, as someone said the other day, the East LA is like the Ellis Island of, like, Los Angeles for Mexicans. Like, that's really where we all landed. And the cultural connections, I remember talking to my mom, and when she lived there, she was like, we didn't have Mexican food. She was like, there were no people here with Mexican food. Like now it's, like, crazy. She's like, but back then, there was no Spanish television that we could just flip on. And she was like, we had to find the spaces for ourselves. And we had to build the spaces. We had to create it in this space and create the mercaditos and do the taco shops like Papa had to make and create this world for us. And I think like now it's become such a, you know, through immigrants coming and enriching it with our culture, it's become this space that we've gotten to also reclaim. There's been a lot of displacement, obviously a lot of gentrification over decades that has created this space like Chavez Ravine and the redlining in the community that kind of led to a lot of Mexicans ending up in that space. There was a lot of racism around that and xenophobia that led to that. But in that process, a lot of the community really healed itself. Like when my mom and family were there was a lot of gang violence, there was a lot of drive-bys, there was a lot of, you know, hard things, but there was still community and love. Like, you know, she jokes about it. That's why there's so much comedy in the show in general. Like, they'll be like, oh yeah, we just like, you know, panza al suelo, like belly to the ground. Like when there was a drive-by and they joke about it because it's like, that's survival. We got to just get through it day by day. But now that same community has worked on healing on itself. And there's so many organizations in Boyle Heights who have done the work, like Proyecto Pastoral and ELAC, and like so many people who have come in to create a healed space. And that's why they're so passionate about protecting it from people coming in and displacing them from a space that they've healed for themselves.
That they've built and it's home, and especially in this home away from home. You know?
For immigrants, especially.
And there's comfort in that,
Yeah, there's comfort in that.
I mean, it's like, it's so crazy because you thinking historically, you brought up redlining. It's like, you know, you were redlined into this neighborhood that you couldn't basically leave. You couldn't get loans approved to live anywhere else. And then you make it work for yourself, and you make it home, and you make it beautiful. Like, you make it this amazing place with so much rich history and art. And then to start getting displaced because, you know, all of a sudden it's cool, like it's all of a sudden it's trendy, you know, and I think there's that line in the first episode where we talk about like, and this is what it feels like, is like, you know, they may love our stuff, but they don't love us, and that's, I think, where so much of it, I think, kind of stems from, of like, that's the when it comes to gentrification and how things are changing, I think it's such a difficult kind of feeling to grapple with, because then at the same time, we're building these spaces, like, you know, we're talking about the change, like the gentrification, the Chicanos that are building these spaces that feel like both of our identities, both as Mexican and as Americans, where it's something that feels like home, that feels like all of my identity, which is, Boyle Heights is the first time that I had ever gone somewhere and I felt that all of me was seen, you know, and I had never experienced that before, because usually the mercaditos and all these places, I'm like, oh, this is like, you know, for my mom's generation, this is for like, you know, and I'm like, there's a little bit of a sense of like, I was like, this is great and I love it and this is home, but it's very Mexican, you know, it's like, this is in
the very white Americanized spaces, it's like, okay, I feel like I stand out here like a sore thumb, or I don't really fit in, and where's the space where you get to be all of those parts of yourself.
Yeah.
And I think we're a lot of folks in the community are reclaiming those spaces and creating them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think LA in general, though, people have this idea of what it is in media, which is like the Hollywood and
In
the
Beverly
West Hollywood,
Hills.
the Beverly Hills. I remember a friend
it's
in college.
much different than that.
Yeah, a friend in college told me, I remember meeting him and he was like, man, I was like, I'm from LA. He's like, oh, I hate LA. And I was like, why? He's like, it's so bougie. Like, it's just like, oh, it's Hollywood. And at that time, like, yeah, I had gone to Hollywood, but the LA I knew was East LA. And I was like, for real? So I was like, the LA I know is dope. Like, there's a lot of, like, Latinos and good food. And he was like, oh, what part? I was like, East LA. He's like, oh, I guess. I never thought about that. And I think with the show, that was one of the things going into it. We wanted to depict East LA and Boyle Heights in a way that was beautiful and with love and with like the colors that you see in the community.
I mean, and I always speak to him like not amplifying or trying to create beauty, like just capturing the beauty that has always been there.
Yeah.
Because it's always been depicted as just, you know, gang-ridden or just, you know, I think just in a way that just feels like, I was like, this isn't the beautiful space that this is. This isn't the beautiful home of East LA.
Yeah.
I mean, I talk about, especially even just in the colors where it's just always so drab and, you know, morose. And I mean, for me, I'm like, I always talk about, I was like, you know, for my mom, like my Mexican mom, she, you know, wants to paint a room, and it's like, instead of painting it all one color, she's like, I'm going to paint every wall a different color, you know? Like, we have so much vibrant color and art and history, and like the Chicano rights movement started there. And I think that we just wanted to capture that and show this neighborhood and the LA that we know and that we love in a way that we hadn't gotten to see yet.
And you guys did a great job with that.
Oh, thank you so
I
much.
really appreciate it. Really nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
For having
Such a
us.
Check these
pleasure.
guys out on Netflix. You won't be disappointed. We'll see you next time. They're on the sit down.